So, affairs. We are really jumping into the deep end with this one, aren't we?
Yes, affairs. I think I spoke last time about some of the reasons that people get into difficulties in their committed relationships, I would say. And one of them that I spoke about last time, the expectations that are put upon the relationship in this day and age, the fact that you have to have a breadwinner, you have to have a lover, you have to be a parent, you have to really be everything to your partner, is one area that causes affairs if you don't have communication.
And do you think that's something that's different now that from in the past? Has that not always been the case? Or
Yes,
is it,
definitely. That's partly because we live much longer, and the expectation of having one relationship in your lifetime, which is the one, it may be quite cynical to say, but as I've spoken before, most marriages lasted between 10 and 15 years. If you were lucky. And nowadays, with wealth and materialism, there are so many temptations. And also, added to which, in this day and age, people feel that they can have what they want. If they desire something, they feel they can have it. And in a way, that it was very, very different, at the beginning of time, when you were lucky to have a man who was going to help feed your children.
So the roles were much more clearly defined in the past than they are nowadays?
Yes, absolutely, because romantic love wasn't really involved. As soon as you have romantic love, there are it's a different playing field.
So you're talking about a period of time when, for example, marriages were very often convenient financial arrangements rather than based on love.
Yes, totally.
Right. Yeah.
And because of the pressure on the nuclear family, and because we have two drives, we have the erotic, passionate, desirous side of us, the shadow side a little bit, and we have the normal, functional way of having to make a living, to bring up a family. That's never really changed. Because we have the two diverse bits, what happens is the mundane life that I spoke about last time sometimes becomes a little bit too much, particularly if you're not getting on for a period of time. And when you're young, one doesn't realise that marriages or relationships, couple relationships, they go through spells of good times and bad times. And, if you hit a time where there's suddenly one of you's lost a job, one of you's lost a parent who really, really understood you very well, and you can no longer go to share your opinions and feelings with them, or a child becomes very ill. There are many things in a small family unit that gives you a lack of breathing space. And you happen to be at the duplicating machine at the office, and this girl is very attractive, and you might be very happily married, and suddenly this urge to procreate, or that's where it came from, which really doesn't have, it just pops up anywhere you like, really, whether it's when you're falling in love with the person you want to get together with, or just sexually. If there's an opportunistic moment there, I'm afraid it happens.
So are you saying that a lot of affairs happen more because of the person themselves rather than necessarily the attraction to the other person, but actually it's all about them and how they feel about themselves?
Well, really, in counselling, we look a lot at the upbringing, what we call attachment to your mother or whoever looks after you, and also we look at adolescent years. Perhaps you got married very young, or you got together with a person, or you got someone pregnant and you shacked up with them, and you find you've got 2 or 3 children with someone that you perhaps wouldn't have married or got together with if the circumstances had been different. And suddenly you find yourself falling for someone else. You don't really understand why, but a lot of it is a longing for your lost youth, your lost childhood, things that perhaps could have happened in a better circumstance that haven't.
You mentioned earlier about the two drives that we all have, the drive on one hand for security, stability, and on the other hand for sort of eroticism, adventure,
Yes.
what you call the dark side. Do you think that is the same for both men and women, or do you think there's a difference?
I mean, I think it's drawing closer because the woman is mixing in a man's world more. But I would say that with the arrival of media, iPhones and porn and apps and all these things, there is availability to get a sexual thrill or frisson anywhere you like these days, and the cultural belief is that you deserve it, and it can actually cause a lot of very sad consequences, many of which arrive in my counselling room with many regrets often, and often those ones are because the people still care and loved each other, but things have got out of control because they've stopped talking to each other. And the deed is maybe done, and then we get to the situation of what are we going to do about this. And often the person who's perpetrated the betrayal is very, very regretful of what they've done, but they're not actually regretful of what happened between them and someone else. And if they really have no way of saying sorry or showing their humility to their partner, then really there is little hope and there's not much I can do. But it is quite rare that. Often they realise that they've had an experience, but they also realise that the person that they truly love is the one that they got together with originally, and they really want to get back together with them.
And presumably, I mean, the perpetrator, to use a rather harsh word, but that person may feel very regretful of what they've done, but at the same time, the other member of the relationship may have contributed to that happening in the first place, and may have some responsibility as well.
I feel there's usually a passive person in the relationship, and there's someone who does the bad deed. But there's usually such an interrelation, between the two. Someone has either not asked for what they've wanted, or they've kept quiet passively because they're fearful that they're not going to be supported, they've got nowhere to live, they love their husband and they're prepared to put up with things, or they love their wife, whatever it is. Usually it's a much deeper issue that needs to be unravelled, and this is where the affair has a few attributes, because it can reinvent a relationship that was actually not a very good relationship in the beginning. And as a couple counsellor, I would say, of course, that in many respects people can find a far happier, more honest and truthful relationship with the person that they've been, married to or in a relationship with for perhaps many years. I see people who come to me with this kind of situation in their 50s even, and they actually love the person they're with, but they've lost contact emotionally with them for many years.
I mean, we're talking about affairs, but presumably within that category there are enormous ranges of different kinds of affairs, ranging from the businessman who's away on a business trip and gets tempted for a one-night stand.
Yes.
At one end of the scale, and at the other end of the scale you've got the person who's dissatisfied in their relationship and feels they've met the person who has all the answers to it, and they fall hopelessly in love. I mean, they're quite different situations.
They're very different, and I mean, they are very different. And the problem is that women tend to go for the emotion, and in many respects it's much more difficult for a woman to get over an affair, because she usually is quite tentative to begin with and then gets incredibly emotionally involved, where it's the other way around normally for a man, and I'm generalising here, but often the man is sexually driven and then gets the emotional bit afterwards. But whichever way it is, they find themselves in situations and they have to question where they're going to go next.
Yeah, and presumably one of the places they can go is to admit that it happened in the first place.
Yes.
And that's presumably a very difficult decision as to whether you confess to it or whether
But so often, I would say 50% of the people that I see, they come because texts have been discovered by their partner, which were obviously not meant for them. But I would say, and I talk about the unconscious a lot when I'm counselling, that was maybe an unconscious, a lazy unconscious something you've done because you are unhappy and you want to be discovered. I know it sounds crazy, but something needs to be done in your relationship, and this is an outing. You either break up or you get together and go to counselling.
Yeah. Well, maybe the next time we talk, we could look at the possible different scenarios and how people might be able to deal with them. From at one end of the scale, realizing that it's the end of the relationship, and at the other end of the scale, seeing it as an opportunity to reinvent their relationship.
Yes. No, I do think, I haven't said a lot about it here, and it's not for everyone, but I do believe there is great opportunity to be married to the same person again in a different relationship, or to recreate your relationship.
Well, that's an optimistic note to leave it on. So we'll leave it there for now.
Okay.